Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Integrated Wellbeing in Action, How to Build a Stronger, Healthier Workforce. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'm just going to review a few small housekeeping items. We are recording today's webinar, and you can expect an email in which with a link that you can share with your colleagues. During the webinar, you may submit questions or comments in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And after we conclude our webinar, you will see a survey pop up before exiting. Please take a moment to fill it out as we appreciate your feedback. I would now like to introduce today's speakers. Danny Vee, a Senior Consultant, Health and Performance. Laura Ledine, Employee Benefits Client Strategist. And Rosalie Crito, Associate Vice President, Health and Performance. And with that, I will hand things over to our speakers to get started.
Great, thank you so much. We're really excited to be here today to talk to you about how you as an employer can really influence and impact your employee well-being, which really, to build that stronger and healthier workforce that we all want to see. There's a lot of, or a significant amount of uncertainty right now in the marketplace, and talking about integrating your well-being into your existing programs, your structures, and your processes is one way to really support your workforce, and at a time that's more important than ever. When we look at the employer trends for 2025, we really are seeing a theme of employers in this sort of hold pattern. They're really kind of wait and see, or going back and kind of looking at really the basics. Are the investment of what they're putting in, is it getting what they want out of it? So today's presentation is really focused on providing you with some more tactical and tangible things that you can take away and potentially enforce or action in your own organizations. If you've attended some of our webinars before, typically we do stick to kind of best practices and a little bit of a higher level message, but just where we are today and the uncertainty that we're seeing, we thought giving you that sort of actionable items would be really appropriate with where we are today. So with that, we'll start at talking about the employee experience. And we have to talk about the employee experience when we talk about well-being. Every decision that you make as an employer impacts your employees within your workforce, which very much impacts their well-being. So as an employer, you are making significant investment to provide resources to your employees to help them manage their own well-being. But these resources are only valuable if your employees know that they exist and know how to actually engage them, to engage with them. So, for most employees, the employee experience is on a bit of a spectrum. So how well integrated it is or how fragmented it is obviously depends on a lot of different organizations. So a lot of the times we'll see policies separate from compensation, separate from the benefits, separate from how an organization manages their absence management or disability management. So we really want to work towards a cohesive employee experience. And Danny's going to walk us through what that looks like from an employer lens.
Great, thanks, Laura. So if you have attended any of our webinars before, you very likely have seen this slide, and you've seen it for a good reason. And it's because when we're talking about integrating priorities, that's truly critical to being able to create efficient and sustainable programs. We like to focus first here on the left. Many organizations are currently operating like this image where your priorities are disconnected. You have different priorities operating within silos. They're not necessarily speaking the same language. They actually may be getting in each other's way. Not all of them may be connected to the same organizational priorities or connected to each other's priorities. And there's a good chance that your employee messaging is not aligned in this situation. So if employees don't know what message they're supposed to receive, they don't really know what they're supposed to do or what's expected of them. And this is a conversation I've had quite a bit with a number of clients, and I'm going to use an example of policy, and specifically drug and alcohol policy, because this is an area that policies can be very disconnected from each other. And the importance of integrating your policies is really where we start to see the language being consistent across the different areas that we see on the screen. So what I see most often when we're looking at drug and alcohol policy is we see a policy that really focuses on violation of their substance use arrangements. So The way it is set up is someone violates the policy, breaches the policy, they are then moved into a process where they can access assessment, they can access time off and treatment, they can access recovery supports, and then they can potentially access relapse prevention programs. And so that process works very smoothly when there is a breach of the policy. What's often not considered in drug and alcohol policies is what happens if someone self-discloses. So do you have a process that's set up in your policy that allows for someone to self-disclose an addiction and receive that same process? If you don't, you actually are likely in contradiction with your occupational health and safety, because occupational health and safety's main objective is to be able to prevent injury or illness or risk of harm to self or others. And if you require someone to violate your policy in order to be able to get support, you don't have that alignment. So if you're truly going to integrate well-being across your continuum from prevention to recovery, which is what we're talking about today, your programs, your policies, your priorities, they really need to be consistent in speaking the same language. And that's what we see here in our middle image. They're all going the same direction. And if you're truly going to shift your culture, which is really just another word for the employee experience, employees need to believe that you mean that you're walking your walk. They need to know what's expected of them. They need to be able to contribute. Every leader, every policy, every process, every priority needs to walk that walk. It needs to reinforce your culture. So I'm going to send it back to Laura, and we're going to kind of start some back and forth here.
That's great. Thanks so much, Danny. Yeah, it's such an important concept. And as you said, it's something it's a structure or a framework that we really utilize in a lot of how we work with clients. So I'll start off with to Danny, can you provide an example of where we've integrated priorities for both well-being and absence and disability management?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, I mean, logically, we know there's a correlation between well-being and disability. Keeping people healthy at work helps to reduce disability. It's not always something, though, that we can clearly demonstrate or measure. So one practical example of integrating well-being and disability is to ensure that whoever is responsible for managing your disability claims and your disability management, whether that is you have internal people or whether that's using a third-party partner, is educated about all of the resources you have to support well-being in your organization. So not only are they educated about them, but they also know how to direct appropriately when someone is in need of supports. So this could include programs through your EAP, your drug and paramedical benefits, your specialist referral or second opinion services, targeted programs for employees who are on disability, the list goes on. Another practical tool you can use to integrate well-being and disability are follow-up surveys with employees who have returned to work after a disability to understand their experience while they were on disability, understand any barriers they may have experienced in the process that you have, and in the recovery process, as well as their return to work experience. This allows you to employ that continuous improvement model, and also will give you some hard metrics that will help you measure that correlation between your well-being offerings and the impact on disability.
Amazing. Rosalie, I thought, do you want to add some perspective from your role with and working with organizations on disability specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. And I'd like to propose two different examples that are very practical, and I hope it's going to speak to the audience today. And you'll notice that in those examples, the integration just doesn't happen on its own. It still requires that intentional effort to break down the silos, exactly like Danny mentioned earlier. But those are very practical examples that I think is going to resonate with folks today. So the first one is I'm going to use the substance abuse policy that Danny talked about earlier. I'd like to go beyond that to think about the disability management component of it. So what we mentioned is someone's going to need treatment at some point if there is some sort of substance, drug, alcohol abuse. And if they need treatment, they might need some time off for recovery. So that means that at some point, we will need to make a shift and submit a disability claim. So one of the integration that is very easy to look at is how does your policy address that shift, that transition? Who's going to do what at one point? Who's going to guide the employee to submit that claim to the insurer? And then subsequently to that, what's important to do is looking at your policy with the disability contract to make sure that they're not contradicting each other. We want to make sure that they complement. We're laughing, but sometimes, it can happen where we really want to do the right thing, but then we forgot some components, some elements of the contractual disability piece, and then the employee does not necessarily get the support right from the get-go. It creates delays and so on and so forth. So it doesn't create that great employee experience that we want to provide to the employee. And so those pieces are important and vice versa. So looking at the contract, looking at the disability policy, but also sharing that policy with your insurer or your third-party provider. That's also important for them to understand your well-being, the different support and resources that you can offer at one point is also a critical piece, so everything is well integrated together. So that's the first example. The second example, I'm going to push it beyond as well, so a bit different than well-being and disability. Let's talk about how benefit plans can also have an impact on well-being and absence disability management. So the importance of an intentional plan design, let's take one key piece, which is the elimination period to be able to shift into that short-term disability, has a great impact on how you will support your employees from a well-being perspective. On the first side, if we do have a very short elimination period, let's say 3 to 5 business days before someone can apply to short-term, that allows your internal team and your employee to get the early support and early intervention right from the get-go. It may create a higher incidence, meaning maybe higher costs from the onset, but it will allow to provide, again, that early intervention, that early support, and potentially reduce some LTD claims later on, which means decrease in cost. On the other side, if you want to provide a longer elimination period, because it makes sense for your organization, it may allow your well-being team to provide all the support and resources within that time frame, let's say it's 10 business days, and avoid a short-term disability case. If you do have those resources that have realistic capabilities of supporting the employee during that time. So it's all, again, intentional and making sure that it's integrated from the beginning. And again, like you mentioned, Danny, that it's all going in the right direction with the same intention.
Amazing answers. And just speaks to the whole reason for this webinar, which is around the importance of integration, which brings me to the next slide and a little bit of around the data that we're seeing. We really are seeing this push around productivity, but this is really being driven, or HR we're seeing is really driving this idea around building these human-centric workplaces that create, that are this high-performing environment or cultures that's based on well-being, that's based on connection, continuous learning, trust, collaboration, and innovation. And, what we know is employees who experience health issues, their productivity does decline. So I think it's important to understand, taking a little bit of a step back when we're looking at building these high performing cultures and understand how are we supporting employees across the health continuum. And part of today's discussion is talking about supporting employees from that prevention to recovery phase. And Danny, I know you're going to go into this, but everyone along the health continuum can really be and contribute to the productivity of an organization. So with that, I'll actually, Danny, keep passing it over to you to the next slide.
Great. We're going to talk a lot about health today. And so we thought it was really important to start with a place of common understanding and where we're coming from in terms of how we're defining health. We've used the World Health Organization definition, which states that to be healthy, someone does not have to be without illness or disease. Because what you'll probably find is that many of your employees are managing chronic mental health or physical health conditions, but that would not change how they define themselves as being in a healthy state. So as we kind of continue to move through this conversation, we wanted to just really start from that benchmark place. And this definition is going to help us frame the health continuum model that we're going to be referencing during our discussion. Again, continuing to come back to these words, prevention to recovery, where your existing programs might be targeted to support the different groups of employees you have in your organization. And so if we start with kind of how we are defining healthy employees, according to the 2024 Health of Canadians survey by Stats Canada, about 52% of Canadian adults rated their general health as very good or excellent, accounting that some people would also have rated in that good place, and that didn't get captured in the numbers. The majority of your employees are going to fall into this healthy bucket. And I'm going to pass it over to Rosalie to talk about the other two buckets that we're going to be discussing today on this health continuum.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Danny. So just like you mentioned in terms of the absence of disease doesn't necessarily mean that someone is healthy. The existence of a medical condition does not necessarily equate to a disability absence. Meaning that, again, the population that is working may be fighting with a chronic disease or maybe the beginning of certain injury or illnesses, and they want to stay at work. So this is what the middle bucket is referring to. It's for those employees that are at work but at risk. That means there may be a presence of a medical condition that begins to affect their productivity or behavior in the workplace. This might show up as tardiness, patterned absences, reduced output, or shifts in behavior like disengagement or irritability, and performance declines. So program that we would generally see in that bucket to help those individuals that are at work and at risk would include attendance management and accommodation programs as well that can help. The important piece to think about this, and we'll talk later about that, is to make sure that they're proactive and adaptable to support the employee. When we move on to the continuum, and we think about it as well in another way, just not a continuum, but 3 levels of prevention where you want to keep the employee either returning to the previous bucket or ideally to the healthy one. So those level of prevention, when someone is on disability, meaning they're off work, they're disabled, there is a condition that impacts their capacity to do the essential duties of their role at work, they need time off to recover. At this stage, programs like short-term disability exist, long-term disability. There's even potentially some of you that use the employment insurance of disability to support employees during that time. So that's good news. You probably already have some programs to help support those employees. Where you might want to look at your programs after today is giving them a little refresh to make sure that they're up to date and that they are all integrated with the other levels of prevention. Back to you, Laura.
Amazing. Yeah, so I think it's important for us to talk about, for thinking about this health continuum, having seen a lot of different types of programs in place at a lot of different organizations, there tends to be a bit of an emphasis on one or the other. So where do you, Rosalie, I'll start with you first. Where do you typically see gaps in how employers are supporting their employees along this health continuum?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll try to be as practical as possible. And I think you'll probably know where I'll be coming from, especially if you heard me talking absence disability in the past. So when we think about that first level of that second level of prevention, that middle bucket where employees are still at work and at risk, what I often see with clients is they don't necessarily have the processes and systems and protocol to monitor and track the absences or declines in productivity. And so this can have a great impact because this is where you're going to notice the first signals that an employee is struggling. Again, we can see tardiness, we can see patterned absences, so the Mondays that we miss every month as an example. Someone who's calling sick repeatedly, it's easy to treat that as an attendance issue and maybe thinking about either punitive measures or asking for a medical certificate to substantiate it. But then what do we do with that? We put it in the employee's file and then we move on. And the employee doesn't necessarily have that support, and that may lead later on to a disability absence. So by identifying those early patterns, this is where it could be super meaningful, very powerful to have those conversations earlier on and direct them into the right programs or the right resources that you already offer. So that's the first gap that I see when an employee is still at work and at risk. When we think about the employees that are off work, the gap is often how much support is provided. It's often, we're often seeing this as an employee feels almost let go from the organizations, out of sight, out of mind. But this time is, again, critical for certain intervention. Making sure that we maintain that workplace relationship are very, very critical. You've probably heard that as well. Some research shows that if someone is off work for more than 6 months, there is 50% chance that they'll return to work, meaning that everything that happened from day one to that 6-month time is extremely critical. This is where we need to support the employee as much as we can. And so one of the gaps that I'm seeing is oftentimes that we don't want to offer, not that we don't want to, but there are no specific programs to help the employees at that time. We fall on the insured to return the employee back to work, but there may be some programs that exist already that you can offer for employees. Think of it kind of like the check engine light in your car, right? So if it goes up and then you fix it right away very quickly, it can be quite inexpensive. And that's a quick fix and we move on with our life. However, if someone on the call, maybe in the younger years, ignores it and the engine fails at some point, then those repairs might be very much more costly to repair all of this. So again, it's the same thing with someone who goes on disability. We are at the end of our rope, so we may need a bit more investment in terms of rehab support, resources that are offered through a disability program. There may be great programs that exist with your insurance that you're not aware of. So my recommendations would be to make sure that you understand and know what's available internally, but also through your different partners to help in those situations. So this is what I see for those two ones, but I'm curious, Danny, what do you see for the employees that are still healthy and at work?
Perfect. Thanks, Rosalie. And as someone who once had a check engine light came on and did ignore it, I ended up having to replace an engine. It is definitely more costly to replace an engine than to just add oil to your car. That was my lesson learned. And as Rosalie mentioned, she's going to be kind of talking from the disability lens. I'm certainly going to be talking more from the well-being and health and well-being space. So I think when we're talking about well-being and we're talking about that bucket of healthy employees, there are a few gaps that we definitely see in how we typically build out health and wellness programs. And while your extended benefits tend to be built, your extended benefit plan tends to be built to support employees across the continuum, what I often see is wellness programs that are built to support your healthy employees. And that's not a negative because, as we just talked about, a lot of your employees are going to be sitting in that healthy bucket. So it's not a negative that you are building them out for that. But what that does mean is sometimes we put less emphasis from that check engine light analogy perspective on your wellness program because we're not seeing the check engine light come on. So we're not necessarily thinking about building a wellness program through a lens of risk mitigation. But it is that place where you can really start inexpensively and start giving some of that preventative and support and proactive support for people who are still in that healthy bucket. So building an effective and sustainable benefits plan and wellness program, it involves thinking about what's going to meet the needs of your employees. And so that could be things like taking a look at your health risks that exist in your population through your data. That could be looking at your demographics, your ages in your population. So lots of different things that you can look at that will help you guide to the needs of what those programs look like. And I think what's challenging is we don't often see employees that recognize their wellness programs as a true value proposition. It's just kind of something that's always been there. And I think that's a mistake that we've made in building wellness programs is we kind of treat it a little bit like a checkbox exercise. It's something that we have to have in place. It often is built very ad hoc. We're maybe looking at other organizations and going, okay, well, if they've got that, they're a competitor of ours, that's how we're going to build our wellness program. And we don't necessarily think about whether or not what that other organization is offering is going to meet the needs of our people. So you're not another organization. Why are you going to copy what they're doing? And we're going to talk a little bit about this later on around, how we differentiate between different EAP programs or different benefit programs that are on the market because they're not created equally. They're not all the same. They're not all going to make sense for you. So there's really that opportunity to be very intentional around what you build to make sure that it's meeting the needs. And I think the other gap that I see is that we don't communicate what we're doing very effectively. And it comes back again to that value proposition. If I don't know that it exists, I'm not going to see value in it. So organizations are typically dropping a lot of money into building out their health and wellness supports. But if it's not being used, you can have the best program in the world. And if it's not being used, you're kind of throwing your money away. So I want to make sure that when we're communicating, that we're really highlighting the pieces of our program that are going to connect with our employees. And I'll give an example of that. So when you promote your employee and family assistance program, do you promote it as a general program? We have an employee and family assistance, or do you break it out into pieces? So if I'm an employee who is trying to survive those terrible toddler years, what I might be most interested in is the fact that my employee and family assistance program has parenting supports. But if I'm only being communicated as a broad program, I'm not necessarily taking the initiative to dig into what's in that program. And then that's going to really increase that value and that effectiveness of your programs as employees start to understand what are the pieces that are most meaningful to them. And I think we also, the last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of a gap in health and wellness is we don't make it easy for people to find things. When I start working with organizations and we're working on wellness strategy, the first thing that we do is we look at their intranet. And we make sure that your wellness resources are all in one place, that they're easy for employees to find, that they're organized in a way that makes sense, whether that's by health risk, whether that's by topic, whether that's by where you are on that health continuum. There's a number of ways that you can organize, but things should be easy to find, and it should be really visible how you access the program. No one should have to dig into layers in your intranet to be able to find out how they're going to access their program, because they're going to stop at the first layer.
I think that's such a perfect example and a really great segue into our next section, which is kind of getting back to the basics. And it seems very rudimentary to say, look at your intranet. And even just organizing your intranet is an act of supporting your employees' well-being. So it's a good reminder, I think, of expanding what our definition of well-being is. It's not just, the EAP or adding these kind of ad hoc step programs or whatnot. There's everything you do that touches your employees really makes impact on their well-being. So as we kind of shift into talking about really getting back to those basics, we're not in an era where we're seeing employees add a lot of investment to this area, but really taking that, as I said, that step back is that massive investment we're putting into benefits, retirement, EAP, training, are all of those different things really getting what we want out of them. So we can't talk about any type of well-being or the employee experience without really talking about data. Data is a great enabler, and it's so important to really lean into the data that you have available. So the best data really allows you to kind of walk a mile in your employee shoes. That's how you really understand your workforce, how to improve the outcomes you're looking for, and potentially streamline costs. Analytics, we know, plays a vital role in enhancing both company strategies or business strategies, as well as benefit strategies. So early adopters have really used data analytics to understand and analyze their workforce demographics to tailor their offerings to really meet the unique needs of their people, especially when we're seeing these cross generations within the workplace. So, as we talk about data, and it's not really new for anybody here, but I think it's important to ask the question of, what are key data points that organizations should be reviewing to understand, A, what's happening with their organization, and two, as you're implementing, different interventions, vendor partnerships, are those getting the results we want to see? Danny, I'll pose that question to you to kind of walk through this slide.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've kind of organized this into how you would, a lot of the data metrics that organizations would typically be looking at that are very accessible, that are often provided through regular meetings with your vendor partners, or can be easily accessed through your internal systems. And these are great metrics to have to help identify health risks, to help identify who your population is, what kinds of programs might be interested to them. And I would say probably the majority of these are what we would use in terms of building a health and well-being program or a benefits plan. When we talk specifically about gaps, like we were talking about earlier, when in the health and wellness space in particular, a big gap is that we can see all of these kind of metrics, and they tend to be those lagging indicators. They tend to help us find the health risks, but we're not actually able to measure, are we moving the needle in terms of employee wellness? And so sometimes we need to be looking at some atypical metrics that we might not historically think would be connected to how we measure our wellness program or how we define success under our wellness program. So some examples of things that you might also be looking at to support your wellness, your employee wellness initiatives would be things like third-party costs for ancillary programs that are available through your partners to support those at-risk employees. Participation in your wellness initiatives or your activities to ensure that what you are in fact offering is resonating with your employees and that they're finding value in it. That can help us really understand if we're moving the needle in terms of participation. Psychological health and safety, that's a big word in health and wellness. And this could be things like benchmarking, or an ongoing measurement of your employee perceptions of whether they feel psychologically safe in your workplace through tools like the Guarding Minds at Work survey or other regular surveys that you offer in your organization, adding questions in that are very specifically connected to psychological health and safety. Another tactical way that you can incorporate psychological health and safety, and I'm not going to call it easy, but it is effective, is incorporating psychological health and safety into your performance development process. So looking at how you add objectives for leaders in particular, but also for employees on how they are accountable to actions and behaviors that contribute to creating psychological safety in your workplace. And the other one that you might look at that may not be quite obvious when you're thinking about health and wellness is your safety incident reporting, because you can actually use your safety incident reporting in a couple different ways. One, if you're tracking psychological health and safety incidences in your reporting, you can pull out that reporting to understand whether you're moving the needle with all of the other work that you're doing around psychological health and safety. And the second one is to be able to create business case for initiatives. So I'll give an example of a time that I worked on a project where we were looking at an organization that was having a lot of sprains and strains injuries. That's what we were seeing out of their safety incident reporting. We leveraged those metrics to design a stretch program that identified when people needed to be able to move, when people needed to start moving their bodies to reduce the risk of sprains and strains from an occupational health lens. So again, going back to that integration piece, but also leveraging some metrics that are a little bit atypical than what you might be thinking about from a wellness program. And Rosalie, I think a lot of the ones that are on this right-hand list are also very connected to disability.
100%. I think, one of the main thing, I can't stress enough how data is so powerful when you look at that and how it can be informative and help you make the right decision quicker than if you're trial and error and all the different initiatives that you can attend at the workplace. One thing I would caution, however, is to avoid that paralysis by analysis. So if you're unfamiliar with what's on the left, or you see them, you monitor them, but you still haven't really fully understand them, or you don't leverage them to put in place some initiative, this is a great place to start. It is sufficient. What is on the right is other things that we can sometimes look at when we want to dive deeper. This is going to confirm what we want to do. So you've heard me talking about pattern absences or intermittent absences. I'll take that first one as an example. I can talk to all of them, but let's take a few of them. And if you want to, you'll get a copy of this presentation, but you can definitely screenshot that because I think those are so important. It's the starting point. So about intermittent absences. If you do notice that someone has been missing 1 to 2 days, 1 or 2 occurrences every month for the past 8 months, how powerful is that to compare to their peers and maybe there's something underlying a medical condition or maybe even a personal situation. How powerful is this where you can have a conversation with your employee, state the facts, and just ask the question, is there something that we can do as an organization in terms of accommodating you? Is this temporary? Here are the great resources that we can offer, and so on and so forth. So a lot of successful organizations, what they do in this space is they help their managers with their system, with automations, to highlight those pattern absences. And then they have programs such as accommodations at that point to be able to support employees earlier on. So super effective, again, if we want to reduce those incidents, this is a great way to look at that. Another fun one that I really like still within disability is the repeated disability claims. So this could be, how many claims per employee within the past 3 years claim for a disability? We don't need to know the cause. We don't need to know if it's for the same cause and so on and so forth. But if we have a lot of employees that have 3 or more repeated disability claims in the past 3 years, there may be some indications that either the condition is not fully resolved, so they return to work either for financial reasons or other motivations, but it's not necessarily resolved, or there may be some incentives that needs to be changed in your benefit schedule, as an example. So again, great integration potential here to either support the employee proactively, or again to look at what you can do either in your plan or how things can be done to support your employee at different stages. Again, I'm going to stop there because I can talk about all the other ones.
We are very passionate about data here at Hub, so I can understand that. And I think it's a good segue again into the next question I'm going to ask around how employers can continue to meet their employees' needs, especially in this environment we are today, where we know employers are sort of pulling back potentially on some investments, or just that we're in this sort of cost pressure environment. I think, Danny, you have some things you want to talk about as we move forward here, particularly around partnering with different, or how you evaluate your partnerships that you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned when I was speaking earlier that not all partnerships are going to be the same when we're looking through a health and wellness lens. So assessing your health and wellness partners can help you ensure that the benefits programs and the wellness programs that you have in place are meeting the needs of your employee population. And it doesn't have to cost more money to do this. It's really just taking those same dollars and potentially applying them in a different way that's more effective and meaningful for your population or your situation at this time. I actually just had a conversation with a colleague about this very question because we were discussing an organization that had high Indigenous population, employees located in remote and rural locations, very challenging access to healthcare resources, and cost constraints. So that's a complicated recipe when you're starting to look at how you design a plan that accommodates all of those things. So what can you do? Where are some opportunities that you could start looking at to address some of those challenges? So, for example, if you have a high Indigenous population and it is a priority in your organization to ensure that you are representative of that population, you could look at insurance partners that can provide coverage for non-traditional benefits. This might not look like a traditional benefit plan, so you need to find someone who's willing to think outside the box with you. When we look at things like remote locations and having employees in small spaces specific to the Employee and Family Assistance Program, and think about counseling coverage, how important is it for you to have in-person counseling if your employees are located in places where there are no in-person counselors? So then is there value in exploring providers that have strong virtual or digital capabilities? If you have additional funds, or if you're looking to reinvest funds from one place to another, how can we look at ways to support a population with limited access to healthcare? And this is not, right now in our world, this is not limited to places that are just small and remote. A lot of places across Canada are having challenges accessing healthcare. Is there value in exploring virtual care offerings that could help identify and prevent conditions that could help in that preventative space before someone is at risk or in need of going off of work? So lots of different ways that you can evaluate your partners right now, the ones that you have, to see if they're the right partners for you. And then another, if you determine that you have the right partners in place, work with them to make sure that you are maximizing the value of your current partnerships. So really work with your partners to review your contracts and understand everything that you have access to. Lots of insurers, for example, have wellness platforms, and as part of those extended health benefits, and those could include things like health risk assessments. And some of them will even provide organizational reporting back to you at no additional cost. Or they might include things like chronic health condition management coaching programs, where people who are claiming drugs for certain conditions like diabetes are automatically put into a coaching program that helps them effectively manage their medications and their risks. So a lot of those things aren't going to cost you anything, but if you don't realize you have them, you may not be availing yourselves of them. And then through your employee family assistance program, you may have access to education or training opportunities, either at no cost through your contract or at a lower cost than you could get by going outside of that provider. So again, we're sitting down, working with your vendors, understanding what your services you have available, not just ones that are at no cost, but also ones that might be fee for service, the ancillary services that we've talked about a couple times throughout today. That could be very valuable in terms of managing organizational risk or employees in the at-risk category, and could potentially cost you more if you need to access those supports outside of the vendor. So I would say, as a starting place, from a very tactical and practical place, as a starting place, use the experience of your health and benefits partners to help you explore those different opportunities. Remember, not everything has to happen at once. It might start with a review. You don't have to change everything at once. Build yourself a multi-year roadmap that implements the most important things for you first, and then looks at the remaining items and kind of slots them in over the next few years.
That's great advice, and I think not an easy first step, but yeah, maximizing what you're currently doing is so important, especially in the time we're in today. Rosalie, I know you wanted to talk through some, more on the disability lens on what this potentially looks like.
Yeah, I wanted to speak a bit more about that, because in that cost pressure environment, and we know disability is very expensive, and literally time is money in an absence. The more claims, the longer they are, the more money you're injecting in that program. So I think, we think about cost efficiency measures such as changing the plan design, reducing certain durations or certain a period where we're supporting, changing the change of definition dates. Anyway, there's so many pieces that you can change within the plan design. But if you don't want to compromise on the employee experience, again, still offering that well-being support, here are some ways that I'm going to share with you that you can, again, implement tomorrow that is very cost effective, that you can use your existing resources, and that can definitely change tremendously for you in terms of the outcome. So you see on the screen that, everybody that can be involved in the disability management process, it's a lot of folks. So obviously your organization may be similar to that. It can be slightly different. Fully understand that. The picture is there's a lot of hands in a cookie jar, right? So if you're trying to grab a cookie, you're going to end up with some crumbs if there are too many people. We don't like that. We want our full cookie. So a thing that you can think of here is, again, I'm going to picture another picture in your mind here, if you can visualize, or you've seen that in the past, is look at all the dominoes. The dominoes video where they're all like aligned in a beautiful pattern, and it takes like 1 to 2 minutes, and wow, it functions really, really well. But what we don't see in the background is all the previous attempts where there was one domino that didn't go in the right position. So it's the same thing here. The more people that we have involved, the more time we need to spend to make sure that it's aligned perfectly and everybody knows what to do, so we can have that beautiful picture. So an easy way to start is ensure the alignment and the communication across your internal team. So let's focus there at first. Does your human resources, your managers, your supervisors, all the other stakeholders involving payroll, unions, and even your employee, because they do have some responsibilities, know what to do? at what time they need to do it, how they should do it, with whom they should be communicating with. So aligning all of this will make things much simpler as soon as there's an absence. We won't be trying to find what we're supposed to be doing. Again, we'll be seeing all those dominoes falling beautifully and creating that pattern and that support. So again, those ensuring that everybody is aligned, and that can start with foundation with a clear policy with roles and responsibilities. The second ways that you can do that, if you want to push that a little bit, is to really focus with your partnership with your insurer or your third-party provider. So you want to make sure that the money you're injecting is well used. So evaluating and moderating your third-party provider, and thank you, like we have it on the screen circled in red. Regularly assess your third-party provider, and most specifically around the service delivery. So the turnaround time. How often does it take to render a decision? How long does it take for returning a communication or a call? And maybe that that doesn't resonate for what you need internally, but set and track performance metrics that make sense. And it could be a return to work success rate as an example. That will be a co-collaboration because the insurer will provide some return to work plans, but we need someone internally at the organization that know what can be accommodated, know the culture, can have those discussions with the managers. But evaluating that, having some metrics in place that you will monitor, review, and make sure that everything is being done appropriately and at the right time, again, can help shorten some of those duration, help employee get back to work quicker. Other suggestions are looking at employee satisfaction, like Danny mentioned earlier, set some communication frequency that you are expecting. So they're very open to have some conversation with you around your expectations and metrics. And this is something, again, that can save a lot of money if everything is being done at the right time with the right people.
Amazing. And so the theme, I think, from both of you has been, in this cost pressure environment, focus on who you're currently partnering with and making sure that they're A, the right partners, and B, we're getting the maximum value from the investment that we're putting into to be partnering with them. And I'm sure people here are saying, okay, well, how the heck do I do that? So my next question to you guys, or I think Rosalie specifically, I'm going to ask this one to you, is what are the steps that an organization can take to go through this process of reviewing their current partnerships?
Yes, we can definitely do that. It's high level. Again, feel free to screenshot if that can be helpful because you can start today. I sound like an infomercial right now, but the first step is to identify what's important for you as an organization. Define your business objectives. It's very rare that we will start a big project without evaluating what we need, what's important to us. So it's the same thing when you're evaluating a partner. It has to be more than just costs. So the first piece is, what do I need? Then the second piece is clarify and identify the expectations and metric. It means determine how your vendors or your partners need to support you, and set those expectations and specific performance metric that will deliver on that effectiveness. I think that's super key. So you know what you need, you know what they need to offer, and then engage with them. So oftentimes we implement something, we're great, we're happy, and then we let things go, and a year later we're like, what the heck happened? We didn't engage into communications. We didn't really adjust as we went through the implementation, or as specific or unique scenario arise, we need to adjust. So scheduling some governance meeting is super important. And think about it from a governance perspective, a strategic perspective, and operational lens as well. Following that, document and assess. So make sure that you have a comprehensive list so you understand what they can offer, their services, their resources, and again, does it make sense with the metrics that you have in place? But make sure that you document that, because some people sometimes may get some promotions or they may change organizations. So everything needs to live and breathe somewhere at your organization. And lastly, another key important piece, and I think, Danny, you touched on that so often, is develop communication and material for your employee. We have so many resources, and you probably have a lot of resources right now that employees don't necessarily know they exist or where to get them. So guides, frequently asked questions, or even some presentations can help clearly articulate, communicate what you can offer to employees. It can be again super effective in those situations. So that would be my recommended approach. Again, simple steps that are strategic, it's measurable, and it will be aligned with your business goals.
That's amazing. And I know sometimes the hardest part about this is starting. And Danny,
Yeah.
I think you wanted to walk us through what are just some prompts to take back to your teams? How do you start this conversation about looking at your vendor partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're getting stuck in those first two steps, then I'm going to sound like the infomercial, like Rosalie said. Take a snapshot and start here. So first of all, refer to your organization's strategic plan. So think back to that slide with all of the arrows. We keep coming back to it because we love it. How do you ensure that well-being and disability are aligned with your other organizational priorities? So start there. And then the questions that are on the screen here, these are just to start you thinking about brainstorming. These aren't necessarily the questions you would use to evaluate your partners, but these can start you thinking about what's important to you, so that you can start thinking about what you want to evaluate, what partnerships you want to look at, what's important in those partnerships, and move from there. And that'll help you assess your opportunities and your gaps.
Amazing. Um, Such an important, as yes, it seems simple, but we know that it takes time and it takes investment of time, and not maybe necessarily financial investment, but incredibly important. So we are at the end of our presentation today in our discussion. There were kind of three overall key takeaways we wanted everyone to have as we exit our time together, and that it is like we know time right now it's a bit volatile. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there are areas that you really can take control. Around how you are supporting your employees, and that is, who do you partner with and how do you hold them accountable? So that's that vendor relationship piece. How you communicate with your employees. First and foremost, benefits, well-being, disability. It's first an exercise of communication. As I think either it was Danny or Rosalie said today, you can have the best benefit plan, you can have the best well-being plan, but if employees don't understand that it's there or how to use it, it's kind of a waste of money. And lastly, collaborating internally is really important. That's that full employee experience. That's how you integrate well-being. That's how you integrate disabilities, when you have all your different parties talking together. With that, I will go to our questions. You've had some opportunities to submit some questions today. Looks like we have time for maybe one or two. So I'll just give me a minute as I take a look here. Maybe I'll go, this one is a good one for Rosalie, around talking about developing evaluation criteria. What are some things that some organizations should be considering as they're reviewing maybe their disability process or programs or vendor partnerships?
Yeah, so if we mean evaluating the program internally versus evaluating our partners, those are two different things, but they work together. So I would say the main thing is don't choose more than 5. Start there. If we have 8, 10, 11, 12, then they get diluted. So 3 to 5 to start with is absolutely perfect. One of the things that I've seen client use as an example is the incidence, meaning the number of new claims approved over the population. So knowing how many claims are we sending? Do we send the right claims as well? That's super important. So I think that can be one. The second one is the average duration of your claims. And again, comparing it to yourself from year to year, from quarter to quarter, is something that will be very informative. And the third piece internally that can be helpful is the resolution. So how do they return to work, or how do they resolve? Do they return to work? Do they transition to long-term disability? So those may be the first 3 ones to assess how your program is doing. If you want to assess your partners, there are many ways you can do that. You can survey your employees specifically around that if they don't do already an employee satisfaction survey about their experience. You can also track the number of escalations and the resolution rates of all those resolutions. It takes a bit more effort, but that is super meaningful at the end of the year when you want to evaluate what your partner is doing to help you in those situations when those complex situations arise. So those escalation volume can be something that can be helpful for you. And there are many more. Again, we can spend a lot of time on that, but I wanted to give you a few of those. So hopefully that's a good starting point for today.
Perfect. I think those are some really good, really tactical key examples employees can, or some employers can here take away. I've got a couple questions coming in around communication. And Danny, I know for your role, you do a lot of employee communications, and so some of the questions that are coming around. Can you add a little bit more detail on this? Like, what does this actually mean to communicate to employees? What do employers need to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm going to go through it really quickly because we did get our 5-minute warning.
Okay.
So I would say when we're building communications, there are kind of really key components of a communication that I think are critical to making it valuable and meaningful. The first is connect it to the why. Like, what are you trying to achieve with this communication? That should be really obvious to whoever is reading it. The other piece I would say is it's not just about directing to one resource. So not everybody's going to find the same resource useful. So can you take that topic and can you connect it to many different resources, or at least a few different resources that people can then find one that is going to resonate with them? I think the other thing is reminding your employees how things work together. I mean, we've been talking a lot about integration from an organizational lens, but there's also integration in how people utilize your programs. So does your employee and family assistance program, for example, offer the ability to continue counseling after your sessions are expired? And can you then go into your benefits plan and your paramedical benefits? So how does that all work together to educate people on that so they can also maximize the use of their programs from a very individual place? Keep it simple. The KISS mentality, right? Keep it simple. It shouldn't be hard to figure out what you're trying to say. And because you know your people, because you've done the data and you've done the work to understand the health risks and understand your population, make it relevant, make it targeted, make it connected to your people.
Amazing. With that, I think we are at time here. So with this, thank you so much for spending your hour with us as we kind of talk through integrating well-being into your workplaces. And with that, I'll pass it back to our moderator.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Hub International, thank you everyone for attending today's webinars. Any question that you may have submitted today that we didn't get to will be shared with Hub advisors for follow-up. As a reminder, we ask that you complete the survey before you close your browser. Your feedback will help us to develop future events, and we very much appreciate it. Again, thank you for joining us. This now concludes our broadcast.